Nurse lost her job after removing 40 grenade shards from a Navy SEAL. 24 hours later, her life changed. Trana Betchen. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The emergency room of St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital was a battlefield. It was a place of controlled chaos, of beeping machines that measured life in frantic, rhythmic pulses, and of human beings pushed to the very brink of their endurance. Here, every second was a currency, and every decision carried the weight of life and death. And in the heart of this crucible was Nurse Alara Vance. To the casual observer, she might have seemed like just another soldier in the unending war against mortality. Her face often a mask of calm, professional focus. But to those who worked alongside her, Alara was the bedrock, the quiet, unshakable center around which the chaos swirled. She possessed a rare combination of preternatural skill and profound, intuitive empathy. Her hands, sure and steady, could start an IV on a rolling gurney, but it was her eyes that held her true gift. They could see past the injury to the person, past the panic to the fear that lay beneath. Her life was a landscape of sacrifice, a series of deferred dreams and quiet, personal battles. She was working double shifts to pay off the crushing weight of her late parents' medical debt, a legacy of love and loss that she shouldered with a quiet, fierce determination. She lived in a small, cramped apartment that was more a place to sleep than a home, her personal life a casualty of her commitment to her patients. She was a healer, tending to the wounds of the city, while her own wounds, the quiet aches of loneliness and exhaustion, went untended. She was a woman who had given everything to her profession, a profession that was about to demand one sacrifice too many. Into this world of controlled chaos and quiet sacrifice, a storm was about to break. A storm in the form of a man whose body was a roadmap of a different kind of war. A man who would force her to choose between the rules that governed her profession and the oath that governed her soul. The wail of the ambulance siren, rising in pitch as it screamed towards the hospital, was a familiar, adrenaline-laced overture to the night's next drama. When the doors of the ambulance bay burst open, it was clear this was no ordinary emergency. The man on the gurney was a ghost, his skin pale and slick with a cold sweat, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He was a Navy SEAL. The paramedics shouted over the din, caught in a training exercise gone horribly wrong, a live grenade, a catastrophic miscalculation. His name was Commander Marcus Thorne. He was a legend in the closed, secretive world of special operations, a man forged in the hottest fires of global conflict. But now, he was just a body, broken and bleeding, his life measured in the frantic, beeping numbers on the monitor beside him. Dr. Alistair Reed, the chief of surgery, a man whose ambition was as sharp and cold as his scalpel, took one look at the patient, and his expression tightened. Marcus Thorne was not just a patient, he was a high-profile liability. A man like that, injured on a nearby military base, brought a level of scrutiny and potential political fallout that Reed wanted to avoid at all costs. "Get him to Trauma Bay 1, Reed barked, his voice cutting through the noise. "Full diagnostic workup. I want scans, blood work, the works, and I want him prepped for surgery." Now, as the team swarmed around the gurney, Alara was already at Marcus's side, her practiced hands moving with an efficiency that was a kind of grace. She was cutting away his tactical gear, assessing the constellation of wounds that covered his torso and legs. It was a mess, a brutal tapestry of shrapnel and torn flesh. But as she worked, her eyes met his, just for a second. His gaze was hazy with pain, but in its depths, she saw something she recognized, a core of unyielding, unbreakable will. It was the look of a man who refused to surrender, even as his body was failing him. The initial scans came back, and a hush fell over the trauma bay. The news was bad, worse than bad. It was a nightmare. Marcus Thorne's body was riddled with over 40 grenade fragments. They were everywhere, in his chest, his abdomen, his legs. But the most critical piece, a jagged shard of metal the size of a thumbnail, was lodged precariously close to his heart. A ticking time bomb nestled against the pericardial sac. A tense, urgent meeting convened in the sterile confines of the surgical consult room. Dr. Reed stood before a massive, glowing screen displaying the 3D reconstruction of Marcus Thorne's injuries, the fragments of the grenade appearing as a deadly, scattered constellation. The hospital's top surgeons were assembled, their faces grim. "The situation is critical," Reed began, his tone clipped and decisive. "The fragment near the heart is our primary concern. Any attempt to remove it carries an astronomical risk of catastrophic hemorrhage. The man could bleed out on the table in seconds." He pointed to another cluster of fragments in the abdomen. These are also problematic. Near the mesenteric artery, the sheer number of them, the time it would take to locate and remove each one. The man would be under anesthesia for 12, maybe 15 hours. His body can't sustain that level of trauma. A heavy silence filled the room. The unspoken consensus was clear. The surgery was too risky, the patient too unstable. Dr. Harrison, a veteran cardiac surgeon, finally voiced what everyone was thinking. Alistair, we can stabilize him. We can manage the immediate threats. But a full extraction, it's not just risky, it's borderline impossible. The conventional wisdom here is to leave the deeper, non-threatening fragments in place. It's done all the time with shrapnel wounds. Dr. Reed nodded, his expression one of grim agreement. That's my assessment as well. We'll go in, address the immediate bleeders, patch him up and leave the rest. It's the only logical, defensible course of action. It minimizes our risk, and it gives him the best statistical chance of survival. Ilara stood at the back of the room, a silent observer. She had been tasked with prepping the commander for surgery, and she had seen more than just the scans. She had seen the man. She listened to the surgeons discuss statistics and risk percentages, and a cold dread washed over her. They were talking about him like he was a problem to be managed, a liability to be contained. They weren't talking about saving him. They were talking about saving themselves from a potential failure. She looked at the screen, at the 40 pieces of metal scattered throughout his body, and she knew, with a certainty that went beyond medical science, that leaving them inside him would be a different kind of death sentence. It would be a life of chronic pain, of infection, of a body slowly poisoning itself. It would be a prison, and she knew, looking back at the memory of his eyes, that this was a man who would rather die than live in a cage. The decision was made. The official surgical plan was stabilization, not extraction. It was the safe play, the one that protected the hospital, the one that followed the cold, hard logic of risk management. As the surgeons scrubbed in, Ilara was in the pre-op bay with Marcus, checking his vitals one last time. He was conscious though heavily sedated, his eyes clouded with a fog of pain and medication. He looked at her, his gaze struggling to focus. The fragments, he rasped, his voice a dry, ragged whisper. Did they? He didn't have to finish the sentence. Ilara knew what he was asking. She looked at this soldier, this warrior, a man whose life had been dedicated to running towards danger, and she thought about the safe plan. She thought about a future of pain, of limitations, of a man trapped within the wreckage of his own body. She thought about the oath she had taken, an oath not just to do no harm, but to be an advocate for her patient. And in that moment, a quiet, steely resolve took hold. She made a choice. It was a choice that violated every rule, that defied every protocol, that put her own career, her entire future, on the line. She leaned in close, her voice a low, steady promise for his ears alone. "Don't you worry, Commander," she whispered, her hand gently resting on his arm. "We're going to get every last one of them, I promise." It was a lie, a beautiful, reckless, career-ending lie. But as she said it, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a release of tension, a flicker of trust. It was the look of a soldier handing his life over to a comrade he believed in. Just then, Dr. Reed swept into the bay, his presence a wave of cold authority. "Is he ready, Nurse Vance?" "He's ready, Doctor," Ilara replied, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the momentous, life-altering decision she had just made. She looked at Dr. Reed, her professional mask firmly in place, but behind it, her mind was already at work, formulating a new plan, a dangerous, unsanctioned strategy. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a soldier in her own right, about to go rogue on the battlefield of the operating room. The surgery was a tense, bloody symphony of controlled chaos. Dr. Reed, a master of his craft, worked with a cold, precise efficiency, addressing the most immediate threats, clamping bleeders, and stabilizing the commander's hemorrhaging body. He was following the plan, the safe plan. Ilara stood beside him, her role to anticipate his every need, to be an extension of his own hands. But she was doing more than that. She was watching, she was waiting, she was subtly, expertly guiding. When the initial stabilization was complete, Dr. Reed was ready to close. "We're done here," he announced, his voice tight with fatigue and relief. "Let's start closing him up." "Doctor," Ilara said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the low hum of the machines. "The fragment in the upper quadrant of the abdomen. The scans showed it was dangerously close to the spleen. We're already in there. It would only take a moment. Reed shot her a look of pure, cold fury. A nurse did not question a surgeon in his own OR. It was a cardinal sin. "Nurse Vance," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Your job is to assist, not to advise. We are sticking to the plan." "With all due respect, doctor," Ilara pressed, her voice unwavering. "The plan was based on preoperative scans. I'm seeing a hematoma forming that wasn't there before. That fragment may have shifted. It poses an immediate risk." It was a gamble, a brilliant, calculated bluff. There was no new hematoma, but in the bloody, complex landscape of the open abdomen, it was a plausible claim, one that Reed couldn't dismiss without looking, without checking. To ignore a direct, specific warning from a nurse in the OR would be a massive breach of protocol, a potential legal nightmare if something went wrong. He was trapped, cursing under his breath. Reed turned his attention back to the abdomen. "Fine," he snapped. "Show me." Ilara guided a retractor, subtly shifting the tissue, exposing the area she had indicated. And as she did, her other hand, with a speed and precision that was breathtaking, passed him a specific type of forceps, one designed for grasping small, irregular objects in tight spaces. She didn't just give him a tool, she gave him the solution. Reed, his pride warring with his surgical instinct, located the fragment. It was exactly where the scans had shown it. But now, with the perfect tool in his hand, its removal was a clean, simple motion. He plucked it out and dropped it into a metal basin with a sharp clink. The first piece was out. Ilara had just hijacked the surgery. The atmosphere in the operating room had shifted. It was no longer a simple, brutal repair job. It had become a high-stakes, unspoken chess match between the iron-willed surgeon and the quietly brilliant nurse. What Ilara had done was an act of profound insubordination. But it was also an act of undeniable genius. She hadn't challenged Reed's authority directly. She had used the system against itself, leveraging his ego and the very protocols he revered to achieve her own objective. And now, a precedent had been set. One by one, with a quiet, relentless persistence, Ilara began to point out other fragments. Each time she would frame it as a new, immediate risk, a potential complication that had just arisen. "Doctor," his blood pressure just dipped. Could that fragment near the renal artery be putting pressure on the vessel? "Doctor, I'm seeing some slight discoloration here. That piece in the lower intestine might be compromising the blood flow." Each suggestion was a carefully crafted move, a plausible clinical observation that Reed was forced to investigate. And each time, Ilara would have the perfect instrument, the exact right tool, already in her hand, making the extraction not just possible, but logical, efficient, almost easy. The other surgical staff watched this silent, intense ballet with a mixture of terror and awe. They were witnessing a masterclass in quiet rebellion. Ilara was not just assisting, she was conducting. She was guiding Reed through a complex, dangerous minefield that he had been unwilling to enter. And she was doing it with such skill and subtlety that he was barely aware he was being led. The hours ticked by. 8 hours ticked. 12. The floor around the surgical table was littered with discarded sponges and packaging. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the low hum of the life support machines. One by one, the tiny metal shards clinked into the basin, a growing pile of extracted danger. Ilara was fueled by a pure, unwavering focus, her body running on adrenaline and a profound sense of purpose. She was a woman possessed, not by ambition, but by a promise she had made to a dying man. She was going to get every last one, and she was not going to stop until she was finished. The final fragment, the most dangerous one, the one nestled against the commander's heart, was all that remained. They had been in surgery for over 16 hours. The entire surgical team was running on fumes, their bodies aching, their minds numb with exhaustion. But Ilara was a pillar of focused energy. Dr. Reed, pale and gaunt beneath his surgical mask, looked at the clock, then at the patient's wavering vital signs. "That's it," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. "We're done. His body can't take any more. We leave the last one. We close, now, doctor." Ilara said, her voice still quiet, still steady, but with a new, unyielding edge. "We can't. It's the one that will kill him. It will kill him if we try to take it." Reed shot back, his frustration and exhaustion finally boiling over. "The risk of perforation is too high. I will not lose a patient on my table because of some nurse's reckless ambition." "It is not ambition, doctor," Alara replied, her voice dropping, drawing him into a final, critical confrontation. It is a promise, and it is not reckless. It is possible. She pointed to the monitor displaying his heart rhythm. Look, there is a specific point in the cardiac cycle, between the T wave and the P wave, where the heart is in a state of relative rest. It's a window, less than 1/10 of a second long, but it's there. If you can time your entry and exit to that window, you can avoid contact with the contracting muscle. Reed stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. It was a theory of breathtaking audacity, a level of precision that was almost inhuman. That's impossible, he breathed. No human hand is that fast. Yours is, Doctor, Alara said, her voice a quiet, powerful statement of fact. You are the best. I've seen you work. I know what you are capable of, even if you don't. It was a masterstroke, a final, brilliant appeal to his pride, his skill, his identity as a great surgeon. She was not just challenging him, she was believing in him. She then did something extraordinary. She began to hum, the same low, steady, rhythmic hum she had used to calm Leo. Hum, hum, hum. She looked at the cardiac monitor, and her humming fell into perfect sync with the rhythm of the commander's heart. Listen, Doctor, she whispered. Listen to his heart. I'll give you the rhythm. You just have to follow it. And so, in the exhausted, hushed theater of the operating room, to the sound of a nurse's quiet humming, Dr. Alistair Reed, guided by a faith he didn't know he had, performed a miracle. He entered the chest cavity, his movements a blur of speed and grace, and in the impossibly small window of a single heartbeat, he plucked the final deadly shard of metal from the wall of Marcus Thorne's heart. He dropped it into the basin. The clink was the sound of victory, the sound of a life saved, the sound of a promise kept. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The surgery was hailed as a miraculous success, a landmark achievement in trauma care. Commander Marcus Thorne was alive, and his prognosis, against all odds, was for a full recovery. The story of the heroic 16-hour surgery made the local news. Dr. Alistair Reed was lauded as a hero, a surgeon of unparalleled skill and daring, but in the quiet, merciless halls of the hospital administration, a different story was being told. The logs from the operating room, the length of the surgery, the sheer number of unscheduled extractions, it was all there in black and white. It was a flagrant, undeniable violation of the approved surgical plan. An internal investigation was launched, and it didn't take long to find a scapegoat. The other members of the surgical team, fearing for their own careers, closed ranks around Dr. Reed. They spoke of a nurse who was overly emotional, who pressured the surgeon, who created a hostile environment. Dr. Reed, in his official statement, was a model of regretful condemnation. He spoke of Nurse Vance's reckless insubordination, and how in a moment of extreme stress, he had allowed his better judgment to be compromised by her persistence. He painted her as a dangerous rogue, and himself as the victim of her unprofessional conduct. He threw her to the wolves to save himself. Alara was summoned to the office of the hospital administrator, a cold, humorless man named Henderson. The meeting was short. There was no discussion, no chance for her to defend herself. She was presented with a list of her transgressions, defying a direct order, violating surgical protocols, acting outside the scope of her nursing license. You put this hospital at immense legal and financial risk, Nurse Vance, Henderson said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Your actions, while resulting in a positive outcome in this one instance, were a catastrophic breach of professional conduct. We have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately, and we will be filing a report with the state nursing board, recommending the revocation of your license. Alara sat there, listening to the death sentence of her career, and she felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. She had known this was a possible outcome. She had made her choice. She had saved a man's life. She had kept her promise. She handed over her badge, her keys, and walked out of the hospital she had dedicated her life to, a hero cast out into the wilderness. Alara's world collapsed. The termination was a black mark that made finding another nursing job impossible. The investigation by the nursing board dragged on, a cloud of uncertainty that hung over her future. Her savings, already meager, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. The eviction notice was the final, crushing blow. She packed her few belongings into cardboard boxes, the life she had built now reduced to a small, pathetic pile. She felt a profound, bone-deep weariness, the bitter taste of a world that punished compassion and rewarded cowardice. Meanwhile, Commander Marcus Thorne was making a recovery that was nothing short of miraculous. His body, freed from the poison of the metal fragments, was healing at an astonishing rate, but it was his spirit that was truly being reborn. As the fog of medication lifted, he found himself haunted by the memory of the surgery. A strange, dreamlike recollection of a quiet, humming voice and a promise whispered in the darkness. He knew, with the unshakable instinct of a soldier who has faced death 100 times, that the official story, the one about the heroic Dr. Reed, was a lie. He started asking questions. He was a man trained in intelligence, in piecing together fragments of information to find the truth. He spoke to the junior nurses, the orderlies, the people in the shadows who saw everything, and slowly, piece by piece, the real story emerged. The story of a brave, quiet nurse who had risked everything for him. He learned her name, Alara Vance, and then he learned that she had been fired, disgraced, her career in ruins. A cold, hard rage, the likes of which he hadn't felt since his days in active combat, settled in his chest. He was a man who understood loyalty. He was a man who paid his debts, and he owed Alara Vance a debt that could never be repaid with money. He owed her his life. He checked himself out of the hospital, against the strenuous objections of a very nervous Dr. Reed, and he set out on a new mission. His objective, to find Alara Vance, and restore the honor of the woman who had saved him. Marcus found Alara on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, in a small, dingy diner on the outskirts of the city, nursing a cup of coffee she couldn't afford. She was staring out the window, her face pale and drawn, the light in her eyes almost extinguished. When he slid into the booth opposite her, she looked up, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. "Commander Thorne," she breathed. "What are you doing here? You should be in the hospital." "I'm where I need to be," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. His gaze was intense, and in it, she saw a profound, unwavering gratitude. "I came to say thank you, Alara, and to tell you that I know what you did." He told her about his own investigation, about the pieces he had put together. "You saved my life," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "You broke every rule for me. You sacrificed your career for me, and you did it because you made me a promise." Alara just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I did what I thought was right. You did what was heroic." He corrected her gently. He then slid a thick manila folder across the table. "I've been busy," he said, a faint grim smile on his lips. That folder contains sworn affidavits from 2 of the junior nurses who were in the OR. It contains a full analysis of the surgical logs, highlighting Dr. Reed's inconsistencies, and it contains a very detailed, very persuasive letter from my commanding officer to the hospital board, suggesting that a public scandal involving the mistreatment of a decorated Navy SEAL would be unfortunate for their reputation. He leaned forward. "It also contains a full, unconditional job offer. The military is always looking for nurses with your particular set of skills, courage, integrity, and a willingness to defy stupid orders to get the job done. The pay is excellent, the benefits are comprehensive, and your first assignment, should you choose to accept it, will be as the head of a new state-of-the-art trauma care unit at the naval base, a unit that I will be personally overseeing." Alara stared at the folder, then at him, her mind struggling to process the sudden seismic shift in her reality. It was a lifeline, a restoration, a vindication so complete it was breathtaking. "But, my license," she stammered. "The board." Marcus's smile widened. "The board investigation was closed this morning. All charges dropped. It seems a letter from a certain high-ranking admiral, who happens to be a close personal friend, can be very persuasive." He had not just come to thank her. He had come to restore her. He had used his power, his influence, his own formidable will, to fight for her, the same way she had fought for him. The story of what happened at St. Jude's became a quiet legend in the medical community. Dr. Alistair Reed, facing an internal inquiry backed by the full weight of the military, quietly resigned, his brilliant career tarnished by his own cowardice. The hospital, under new leadership, implemented a new set of protocols, named the Vance Protocols, designed to empower nurses to be more active advocates for their patients in the operating room. A single act of courage had started a ripple effect, a wave of change that would benefit countless future patients. Alara, in her new role, thrived. She had found a place where her skills were not just valued, but revered. She built a team of the best and brightest, a unit dedicated not just to the science of medicine, but to the art of healing. She and Marcus became a formidable team, their partnership forged in the crucible of the operating room. built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared, unspoken understanding. They were two warriors, from two different worlds, who had found in each other a kindred spirit. One evening, months later, they stood together on a bluff overlooking the ocean, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet. "Losing your old life?" Elara watched the waves, a gentle, rhythmic hum on the shore. "I didn't lose my life, Marcus," she said, a soft, confident smile on her face. "I found it." This story is a testament to the quiet, often unseen heroism that exists in the world. It is a reminder that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what is right, even when it comes at a great personal cost. Elara Vance was not a soldier, but she was a warrior. She fought a battle not with weapons, but with compassion, with integrity, and with an unwavering belief in the value of a single human life. Her story asks us to look closer at the quiet heroes all around us. The nurses, the teachers, the caregivers, the people who perform small daily acts of grace that hold our world together. It is a call to honor their sacrifices, to recognize their worth, and to have the courage in our own lives to make the right choice, not the easy one. For in the end, it is not the rules we follow, but the promises we keep, that truly define us.